Fanboys and fangirls everywhere love to share their thoughts on and discuss the stories and properties they love, and I am no exception. This is the series where I share various opinions, talk about interesting little tidbits I've noticed, pose questions, and analyse different aspects of the things I love. Welcome to the Fan Ramblings. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Fan Ramblings. So, just a couple Saturdays ago, Doctor Who Series 10, Season 36 technically, finally premiered with the episode The Pilot, and just like every Whovian under the sun, I had an opinion on it. Then I procrastinated getting that opinion out there, so now Smile and Thin Ice have also aired in the meantime. Whoops. But guess what, I have opinions on those too, so that's what I'm going to share with you today. Not so much a proper review per se, but just a few general thoughts and tidbits I picked up on from the 3 episodes, along with my initial impressions of the new companion, Bill Potts. So, going into the series, we were all made aware that the idea was to do a soft reboot, making it easier for newcomers to pick the show up without having to go back and watch the previous 9 series. This idea was certainly a sensible one. Clara's exit made for a pretty convenient cut-off point, coming as it did at the end of Series 9, unlike Amy and Rory's, which came mid-Series 7, thus having a knock-on effect on Clara's introduction. Amy and Rory's intro wasn't able to be a complete reset either, because of them entering the series in the middle of the Doctor's latest regeneration, which represented a certain level of baggage from the David Tennant era. The beginning of this series was the first real opportunity the writers had had in a long time to truly start afresh, which was just as well after having run for so long, not to mention the fact that the show was returning from a year-long break. This time there was no regeneration baggage, no existing companions carrying over, and as such, no overhanging storylines or anything like that to potentially bog things down. The show was free to just get on with things, starting with introducing the new companion. While taking this approach does make sense, and is quite a natural decision to make, and has helped with the feeling of rejuvenation people felt when episode 1 aired, I do have one nitpick to make about it. We all know that both Steven Moffat and Peter Capaldi are leaving at the end of this year, with the Christmas special filling the role of their double swan song. It's been rumoured, and even if it hadn't been, it'd still be a likely possibility, that this will also be Pearl Mackie's only series, given the change in leadership that's on the horizon. If this proves to be true, in conjunction with Moffat and Capaldi's joint departure, it would mean a completely blank slate for Series 11 when Chris Chibnall takes over. This would then mean that we'd have another reset 2 series in a row. While the handover to Series 11 would naturally involve some regeneration baggage, thus not quite making it a complete cut-off point, it would still be a fresh start on the whole. Which begs the question, why bother making Series 10 a soft reboot when Series 11 is almost inevitably going to be one as well? Notice that I say almost inevitably. We don't know yet if Mackie will be going with the guys or not. Series 11 being the opportunity for another reset largely depends on that, and quite frankly, that could go either way. On one hand, Moffat tends to create companions that last more than one series. Both the Ponds and Clara stayed for 2.5 series each, so it makes sense that you would do so again here. However, regardless of whether Chibnall would mind or not, it's entirely likely that Moffat may feel uncomfortable leaving his successor with something from his era to pick up and have to deal with, preferring instead to hand him a more truly blank canvas onto which to paint his ideas and his version of the show. For this reason, Bill may well have been designed to only last for this one series before the handover. Honestly, it could go either way. With some things, there's a bit more of a foregone conclusion, or an outcome that was always more likely than the alternatives. This is not one of those times as I see it. But enough about our uncertain future for now. Let's get back to what's been going on in the present. The common thing that people were raving about with the pilot when it aired was that it really felt like a breath of fresh air, and that this was the first time in a long time that we'd seen the Doctor's companion experience a strong sense of wonder upon witnessing the things that go on in his world. I think this is pretty true, and I believe it's largely down to two factors. The first would be the tone of the show. Since the introduction of Peter Capaldi, the show's moved away from the magical fairy tale tone of the Matt Smith era to focus more on the scariness and darkness of the universe, an approach which does make sense and has a lot of merit to it. Doctor Who is traditionally supposed to be a scary show, after all. This darker tone is also more befitting the new Doctor's initial characterisation, being darker and more serious, which it arguably needed to be after 2 nice guy Doctors in a row. Back then, that was the breath of fresh air we needed. However, while introducing a new Doctor under a darker tone works, introducing a new companion only really works under the more magical and wondrous tone. Otherwise, you'd have to wonder who'd ever sign up for more of this horrible experience. So, the show has naturally gone back to a more Matt Smith era style tone that places the emphasis back on the sense of wonder and amazement, like we still had back when Clara was introduced in The Snowmen. One of the best elements of that episode is the sense of magic and wonder that we get to experience through Clara's discovery of the Doctor and his world. The pilot feels fresh and new because it's returned the show to this tone of storytelling, one long disused. It also marks a return to a more, though not completely traditional companion intro, which we haven't really had since Martha, and that was back in 2007. That's 10 years ago. It's more traditional in the sense that there isn't a mystery or anything like that surrounding Bill like there was with Amy and Clara, but still quite unique in terms of the circumstances of how they meet, and how Bill discovers the world of the Doctor. The pilot takes place over the course of several months, and Bill and the Doctor are friends long before she discovers he's a time-travelling alien, which, as far as I'm aware, is a first. Speaking of Clara, she's the second factor that adds the feeling of freshness this episode provides. With only a couple notable exceptions, Clara's reactions always tended to be more subdued. You had no doubt she still found everything the Doctor showed her amazing, she just tended to keep it to herself most of the time. She didn't want the Doctor thinking she was going to be too easy to impress. Then, as the show went on and Peter Capaldi came in, bringing with him the aforementioned darker tone for the show that was prevalent throughout Series 8 and 9, the show turned away from showing the wonder of the universe to showing the danger of the universe, and with a less human-friendly Doctor, the ante was well and truly upped in the character drama department. I believe one of the main reasons you don't get as much of a sense of wonder from Clara in her later episodes is the simple fact that the show just wasn't taking the time to spend on that particular element. It had other priorities at the time. That, and by the time of her departure, Clara had been travelling with him for a long time. She's currently the longest-serving Revival-era companion. So naturally, after a while, she's going to have become a bit more acclimatised to it all. That's not to say the wonder of it all was lost on her, we know for a fact that's not the case. Just that, being realistic, and for lack of a better way of putting it, you're just going to get used to it after a prolonged length of time. After a couple years of TARDIS travelling, you're not going to feel the need to have a big, gasping, and completely stunned reaction to absolutely everything you see anymore. I think to see a companion still react like that after 3 or 4 years on screen would be pretty annoying. But I digress. My point is that Clara was a veteran by the time she made her exit, so it was only natural that the sense of amazement was reduced, though not completely absent. Because of this, when the complete newcomer, that is Bill Potts, wanders onto the scene, being the complete antithesis to Clara in terms of her level of experience, is what makes the show feel re-energized and freshened up. It's the same principle as what I was saying about the tone of the show. Return to a style or element that hasn't been seen or used for a good long while has allowed the show to flex its muscles again, just like it did when it chose to move away from these now returning elements in the first place. While some people may not have appreciated Moffat's experimenting in the past, no one can deny it's only done the show good in the long run. By tinkering with things like the way companion introductions usually work and so on, he helped to make stories like Amy's and Clara's a bit more unique, and helped the show avoid repeating the exact same thing over and over again. Like I said about Series 8's change in tone, these things were the breath of fresh air we needed at the time. Now that he's brought the show back to a more traditional way of doing things, though still maintaining an individual flair in order to still have something that is actually new, he's made the show feel renewed again because we haven't seen these things in ages. If he hadn't experimented with some things and had just kept doing things the same old way this entire time, it wouldn't feel so new and rejuvenated now. His past tinkering has done the show a world of good in the present. In fact, in all likelihood, it's probably not just the fact that these older, lesser used elements are back that makes the show feel so rejuvenated. The simple fact that it's back at all after a year-long break would contribute to that, I wager. It's had a year off to recharge its creative batteries, much like it had back in 2009. A long-running show like Doctor Who only ever benefits from taking regular breaks, because they help to ensure it doesn't end up running stale. Having said that, it probably is the return of the lighter tone and the Novice Companion that do the most to make the show feel so re-energised. Speaking of the Novice Companion, let's talk about Bill. I'll admit, my first impressions of her, from the introductory clip they produced back in 2016, weren't overwhelmingly positive. They weren't overwhelmingly negative either, I just found her a bit grating, really. Particularly the sound of her voice. She kinda came across as just another version of Donna, really. These feelings weren't helped by the fact that I wasn't really over the loss of Clara yet, being as annoyed as I was by the handling of the majority of her departure. Hell, even if they hadn't screwed her up at the end, I'd probably still be having a pretty hard time with it. You see, the thing is, with Clara's departure from the series, history has kind of repeated itself for me as a fan. My first Doctor was David Tennant, so when it came time for him to leave, I wasn't handling it very well. After Matt Smith took over, I knew I liked him, but I also knew he was never going to hold a candle to Tennant for me, as open to and accepting of him as I was. Somehow, the series just didn't look quite right without Tennant being there, and part of me was just waiting for him to walk into the shot and start being brilliant again. While she obviously wasn't my first companion or anything like that, Clara still meant to the companion role, for me, what Tennant meant to the Doctor, and it was really hard to see her go. Even now, seeing someone other than her at Capaldi's side just doesn't look right. It's weird not having her there anymore. I'm going through with her a version of what I went through with Tennant when and after he left the show. Bottom line, regardless of how good she was going to be, if I wasn't over Clara, I wasn't going to be able to accept Bill very easily. But then I read an advanced, spoiler-free review of the pilot by a Radio Times writer, who likewise hadn't been entirely convinced about Bill by the promotional material. This guy said he'd been pleasantly surprised, and that doubters should give her another try, reserve judgment until they'd seen the episode for themselves. So then the pilot aired, and I was somewhat pleasantly surprised. Pearl Mackie clearly has really thrown herself into the role, which she should do, really, and she certainly does a great job from beginning to end. Whereas Clara was designed to be more subdued and mysterious upon her introduction, Bill has clearly been designed to be as much of an open book as possible. People were already commenting after just the first episode on how well they felt they already knew her. My one gripe in the pilot was that she did tend to come on a bit strong at times for my liking. Remember how I said she initially came across to me as a kind of Donna Noble Jr.? Yeah, she kind of has that same trait of reacting in a really big way to everything, which isn't strictly a bad thing for the most part. I just find it a bit wearing after a while, particularly with that equally Donna-esque voice of hers. What I will say though is that she succeeds at having a less gobby sounding voice than Donna used to have. Hers is just generally a bit grating, especially as Bill has a tendency to start talking and not stop really. As overbearing as she can be at times, it's nice how they make the point that she has actually watched some movies. Moffat makes a good point when he argues that surely a real-life person would recognise a mind wipe when they see one for real, having seen them on TV or what have you. Personally, with past companions, I've always just put it down to them just not thinking about what they've seen in movies in the moment that they're confronted with strange stuff like this. But like I say, it's fun to actually see this somewhat curious question acknowledged within the show. It's very meta, which it seems a lot of fans are appreciating. Also, I'll admit some of the questions Bill asks are pretty good ones. Things like the initials of TARDIS not working in another language, asking how you steer the TARDIS, how much it cost, why the seats aren't closer to the console, why aren't there seat belts, are there side effects to time travel? All those things are pretty sensible, pretty reasonable questions. I could absolutely imagine a real-life person asking those things. And then there's the lines like the TARDIS looking like a kitchen and asking to use the toilet and so on, and it just starts to feel like they might be trying a bit too hard to make her funny. It's all those irksome little things, plus the big reactions and the voice, that have stopped me from giving her a real rave review. Thankfully, Smile and Thin Ice both shine light onto the other aspects of her character, namely her compassion and temper. Where Clara was a more guarded individual, Bill is definitely a character who wears her heart on her sleeve, and I think these two episodes did a better job of allowing Pearl Mackie to demonstrate her emotional range. There was a bit in the pilot, but that episode was still mainly focused on introducing her as a fun and slightly zany character. I definitely found her much more watchable in these two episodes, with the focus on her more serious side taking more of a centre stage. She has less time to do the big, please love me reactions, which I think's done her good. And it certainly did me good. These are the episodes where she's developed more into a fully rounded character, not just a stand-up comedian. Someone else that's done her good? She has a new kind of relationship with the Doctor. The majority of the Doctor-companion relationships in New Who have been some kind of variation on the best mates dynamic, where they get along pretty easily most of the time and have a lot of fun. Even Amy, despite having a very unique introduction, has this kind of relationship with him. And for the brief time she travelled with the 11th Doctor, so did Clara. I feel like the first majorly different dynamic came in Series 8 with 12 and Clara. Their friendship was a lot more troubled to begin with, and they argued quite a lot, but underneath all of that outward tension, they both possessed a real fondness for each other, and by the time of Clara's exit, had become the most closely bonded they'd ever been. Having that more argumentative, rockier outer layer to their friendship made the fact that they loved each other so dearly that much more adorable. Unlike previous TARDIS teams, they didn't always find it easy to be each other's friends, but still stuck together whatever happened. It was a refreshingly new kind of dynamic for the show, and did it and the characters a world of good. And praise the Lord, with Bill, they've done it again. They've given her a relationship with the Doctor that's unique among New Who companions so far. Their friendship is very much that of student and their teacher, which, as Moffat said, is a very particular kind of friendship. The series even goes so far as to make it explicitly clear in the story, with the Doctor essentially now possessing a day job as a lecturer at the university where Bill works, and having taken Bill on as his private student. It's made abundantly clear that this is what the relationship is by not just leaving it as a metaphorical thing, by having them literally be teacher and students. Depending on your viewpoint, this could either be a very clever move on Moffat's part, or arguably a bit lazy. I'm going with the former. Either way, Moffat has successfully found another kind of dynamic to write about, which is another element that's contributed to the feeling of freshness that came with episode 1. I do have one continuity nitpick to make, however. How does she not know what a Dalek is? She would have been alive during their invasion of Earth back in Series 4. I know this is supposed to be a fresh start for the show and all that, but they can't just go ignoring continuity like that. With Amy, they explained her lack of knowledge away with the cracks in time. And with Clara, you never actually see her first encounter with a Dalek. People mention the Dalek Asylum to her, and she never questions what a Dalek is. Conclusion, she already knew because they invaded her world not so long ago. Of all the things Bill should definitely already know, this would be pretty high on the list. All in all, I like Bill, but she hasn't really blown me away yet. I find her good, but not really amazing. Not yet, anyway. I don't feel like we've quite gotten to what makes her unique yet. She's got the whole thing of asking awkward questions and being meta, which makes for a good trademark, but isn't really a character or a story. Her tragic backstory has only really upped the ante on dead parents for companions, by having both parents be dead, not just the one. It's endearing, and I'm not knocking it. I actually think this is really good and quite interesting, but it's still not really a far cry from what we've seen before. We know she's fun, funny, caring, compassionate, brave, and strong enough to stand up to the Doctor when she has to, but All those things are prerequisites for a companion. They all share those traits. These are the things that make Bill a good companion, but I'm not seeing a whole lot that makes her a unique one. Each companion has had a unique story so far. Rose was liberated from her boring corner of the world to realise her full heroic potential, as well as having an unspoken romance with the Doctor. Martha grew to realise she wasn't second best to anyone, and that she deserved better than to stay in a place where she'd be treated as such. Donna thought she was worthless, only to become the most important woman in the whole of creation. Amy was still partly stuck as a child emotionally, hanging out with her imaginary friend, until she made the decision to grow up and leave him behind to be with Rory, her husband. And Clara was the outwardly confident but inwardly vulnerable control freak whose story focused not on how life with the Doctor changes people for the better, but on how it can change them in a negative way. Hopefully something unique will come with time for Bill. We are only 3 episodes in so far, so give it time. But I'm still slightly concerned that just being the one to ask awkward questions and be meta is just going to become all she does. Maybe she'll betray the Doctor and turn out to have been evil the entire time. That'd be unique. We've never had a companion turn evil before. Think about it. 12 and Clara had a really rocky start to their relationship, only to end up becoming super attached to each other, like peas in a pot. Bill immediately got off to a great friendly start with the Doctor. Could this be set up for a less than friendly end to their relationship? I've seen people theorise that Bill being able to access the area where the vault is kept, whilst the security's been set to friends only, could be set up for a betrayal to come. Or it could be set up for Missy getting down there and getting into the vault. But that's me starting to get off topic. Whatever happens with Bill, make no mistake. As things currently stand, 3 episodes into the new series, she's looking good. And while I'm still struggling a bit to accept her, I do have to admit I like her. Certainly, at the admittedly very early stage of the end of episode 1, she seemed promising. And with her introduction arc seemingly wrapped up with the end of Thin Ice, she certainly remains so. We'll see how she develops as the series goes on. Nardol's been pretty fun too. Like most people, I was sceptical at first as to how justified his promotion to companion status really was. But much like Bill, he's pleasantly surprised me somewhat. I like that he got to use a sonic screwdriver of his own. A hand-me-down from the classic era no less. One of the things I actually liked about Clara's development in Series 9 was how she was more able to act independently of the Doctor, talking down the mire by herself until somebody screwed it all up, and being able to do TARDIS stuff by herself too. This is the general sort of place I think all, or at least most companions should be at by the time they're leaving. To me, it just makes sense. If the Doctor trains them up on the basics, like TARDIS flying, and gives them a sonic of their own to use, so that they don't have to worry about sharing just the one, that means they can do some of the little things by themselves, freeing him up to deal with the bigger things. What I'm currently liking about Nardole is that he's sort of already in this kind of place. We heard from interviews and now know from the series so far that he's on a mission for the Doctor, guarding the mysterious new vault the Time Lords obtained and has hidden beneath the university while he's away with Bill. Not that he's supposed to be. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. The companion can go off and handle certain jobs by themselves, so that the Doctor's free to deal with all the other crap without having to worry about that as well. I'm genuinely thrilled to get to see a bit more of this, and with Nardole being a completely different type of character to Clara, that proves it can be done without making all the companion characters look the same. Again, much like Bill, I think it's still a bit too early to tell at this stage if bringing him back was a good decision or not. But he certainly proved entertaining enough so far, and has me looking forward to seeing what they do with him later. I'm particularly intrigued by Moffat's comments that he has a very shady past. It sounds to me like they're preparing us to see Nardole as a character completely turned on his head, and unlike the mostly disastrous development of Clara in Series 9, this could actually work, because he was initially introduced as pure comic relief, so he doesn't have much established about him to risk contradicting. In this respect, I might just find him a little bit more interesting than I do Bill, actually. Which makes it a bit of a disappointment that he only features in episodes 2 and 3 very briefly. Again, we'll see how this develops as the series goes on, as well as the mysterious vault, which could honestly be, or contain, basically anything. But given the ominous knocking heard at the end of Thin Ice, lots of people seem to be theorising it could be John Sims' master locked away in there. Certainly, that was my initial thought, and it would certainly seem that there is something alive inside the vault. But we still don't know for certain though, and we shouldn't expect to this early on. Nardole addresses the knocking as though it's coming from a living thing, but that could just be him personifying the threat, a la the 11th Doctor when he saw the crack in room 11. While Thin Ice might appear to confirm the thing inside the vault is a who rather than a what, we still don't know for certain because it's not an explicit confirmation. We're not supposed to know for certain yet, hence why it's called the vault rather than the prison. Having said all that, it is a very strong implication though. Perhaps the Doctor has the hybrid locked up in there. He did at least claim to know what and where it was in Heaven Sent. Curiouser and curiouser. Speaking of seeing how things develop, one of the other key talking points of the pilot was how it kept things simple. Much like the 11th Hour, the Snowmen and Deep Breath before it, this episode's focused primarily on introducing us to the new arrival and giving us a feel for the sort of character they are. As such, the threat of the episode, again much like the 11th Hour and Deep Breath particularly, is, quite frankly, utter bullshit. First we had the essentially undeveloped villain of Prisoner Zero, then the half-baked, half-faced man. This time we have the unnamed, sentient, shape-shifting, planet-hopping, time-travelling rocket fuel. Yes? Really? Even by Doctor Who standards, this is pretty bollocks. But as usual, next to nobody cares because we all know that's not what the episode's really all about. What it's really all about is Bill, and this only served to do Pearl Mackie a massive favour. Putting her front and centre is what really allowed her to throw herself into the role of Bill, like I said earlier. And given the favourable impression I currently have of her as a result, I can only say that is to the episode's benefit. That said, I found it a bit irritating in Smile and Thin Ice to see this simplicity of story continue. The threats haven't really felt as fully developed as they could have been, and I think this is largely down to the continued focus on Bill. As I said, these first 3 episodes form an introduction arc for Bill, with each one leading directly into the next, and forming one long, continuous chain of events, which isn't something you see very often in New Who. Nice touch to classic era there. And this helps form quite a tightly written arc, which is a good thing. Where the pilot's focused on getting Bill into the TARDIS, Smile and Thin Ice are focused on what happens next now that she's there, and to a certain extent, it feels as though their primary purpose is simply to just give Bill things to react to, so that she can learn what she needs to learn about time travelling and the Doctor. I think Smile did a better job of just telling its story. The lesson that Bill learns in this episode is that the Doctor is the helpline, and I don't think it was integrated in a way that felt too forced. Whatever her first adventure was going to be, she was always going to ask the question of why does it have to be us who help? And I feel like this was incorporated into the story pretty organically. It is of course something that had to happen in some way, because it's a necessary piece of housekeeping whenever you introduce a new companion. But the episode and its story don't feel like they only exist to serve this purpose. I think if you removed that element and placed this episode later on in the series, it would probably still stand up as a pretty decent episode. There's a little bit of social commentary in there with the emoji bots, which initially come across as a truly cringeworthy idea, but prove themselves to actually be quite a clever idea. Because they can only communicate through emojis, they don't understand the grief of the colonists. They misinterpret it and deal with it in such a way that it only makes matters worse until all humans are dead. It's a commentary on how technology, or rather our use of it, has impacted the ability of the modern generation to communicate effectively. There's also a couple of good twists and turns thrown in for good measure, which beef up the plot a bit, but in a way, it still feels slightly undercooked, because Bill's development is taking centre stage. I didn't feel like a truly dangerous or intimidating threat at any point, because it didn't get the time to develop into one. Then there's Thin Ice, an episode I've been dreading ever since it was announced, purely down to the woman writing it. I have to admit though, this was a far stronger episode than Face the Raven ever was. It's not bogged down by story arc stuff or the appearance of recurring characters who derail the plot. This time, the focus of the episode is Bill learning all about the difficult decisions the Doctor has to make sometimes, and her being exposed for the first time to his more ruthless side. Again, this was something that was always going to happen at some point, so it's good that they get it out the way as early on in the run as possible. This does, however, lead me to my biggest problem with Thin Ice. The event that sets this character story in motion is the Doctor allowing a child to die. I gotta say, and this isn't just me hating on Sarah Dollard, I swear I have no vendetta against this woman at all, but I'm really not a fan of this. For me, the Doctor has two lines he never crosses. 1. Committing genocide. 2. Harming, or allowing others to harm, children. This is why it was such a powerful moment in Human Nature when John Smith allowed the other boys to beat Latimer. It showed just how different he was from the Doctor. While Peter Capaldi's Doctor is a more ruthless incarnation, even he has shown he has a limit. Last series, when he saw a child die, namely Ashilda, he went skits and ended up making her immortal, all because he couldn't handle the death of a child. Earlier on in that episode, he decided to stay because of the crying baby. Here, in Thin Ice, he just callously lets the kid die, and is more concerned with retrieving the sonic screwdriver. I know the kid was basically doomed, and that there probably wasn't any way to save him, but the Doctor, any Doctor, would still try, because it's a kid. Literally, all they had to do to fix this moment was make the character an adult. God damn it, I knew Sarah Dollard would do something to piss me off with this episode. It's so stupid. She always manages to capture something about the series perfectly. Last time it was Clara's final words. This time, it was not only the speech the Doctor gave, but also the moment he told Bill, passion fights, but reason wins, before losing his cool and decking Sutcliffe for being a racist piece of shit. That moment in particular perfectly summed up Capaldi's Doctor for me. Cool, detached and pragmatic on the outside, with a burning, idealistic passion on the inside that occasionally boils over. In her appearance on the after show, she talked about how Capaldi's Doctor is an especially passionate and sensitive character, albeit very deceptively so at times. How can someone who clearly has the ability to understand the show so well cock things up this consistently? She's 2 for 2 on doing this now. Sarah Dollard, please stop. Or else you won't be welcome when Series 11 rolls round. Not in my book anyway. So, having got that out of my system, let's talk about the rest of the episode. As I said, the main thing going on here is Bill continuing to learn about the Doctor. It was certainly an important confrontation for Bill to have with the Doctor, calling him out on not only letting people die, but actually being a killer. As I think back on the series, that seems to be something that's been glossed over in the past. All the Doctors have killed somebody at some point, but there's never been an on-screen call-out before, with the exception of Donna. Rose didn't have a go at the Doctor for allowing Cassandra to die. We never saw Amy or even Rory confront Eleven on the subject of how many people he's killed. Nightmare in Silver shows us Clara quite happily disintegrating Cybermen herself, with no apparent qualms. So when exactly did she and Eleven have the killer talk? It must have been a while ago if she's already at a point where she herself is now a killer as well. It's perfectly likely these things did happen off-screen, so you are allowed to add them into your headcanon. But my point is, this is one of the few times we actually get to see it, which I'll admit is quite nice. We also get to see her face her first impossible decision, which is actually just another version of the one Clara faced in Kill the Moon. Is your future worth the suffering of another life? Although the Doctor is a lot nicer about it here than he was back then. It would seem Clara's outburst at the time taught him his lesson. This is what I mean about the focus of these episodes being more on Bill than the actual plot itself. The dilemma isn't developed much beyond simply posing the question, in favour of drawing more attention to how Bill struggles with it. They don't spend the time on it, so it only goes so far. Unlike Smile, I'm not so sure this episode would work as well without the companion-focused elements. If it had had more time to spend on the plot itself, it would probably have just full-blown ended up as another version of Kill the Moon, which wouldn't have been good. The episode also takes a few cues from The Beast Below, with the humans being the bad guys and the giant monster being the innocent victim, as well as having some digs about history being a whitewash, which are fun to hear but don't really go anywhere. There is a very clever setup towards the start of the episode though, where Bill's worried about being black in this time period, saying slavery's still totally a thing. Nicely done, Dollard. Nicely done. At this point, I feel I should probably clarify something. Focusing on Bill's character development and personal journey isn't a bad thing. Considering how Clara's first half of series got criticised for not doing so, it's nice to see how they've learnt from that feedback and are acting on it as much as possible. But here's the thing, Series 8 and 9 were both able to give their episodes exciting plots with real, tangible, developed threats while still progressing the character arcs. Just go ahead and compare the one-sidedness of Thin Ice to Kill the Moon, which balanced the two objectives pretty well, exploring both the dilemma and its effect on the people facing it. The best examples of what I'm talking about though would probably come from Jamie Matheson's 2 episodes from Series 8. Those 2 episodes feature some very important points of development, particularly for Clara, while still telling exciting adventure stories with a real sense of threat. I don't really feel like we've gotten that yet in Series 10. As much as the character focus has benefited Bill so far, I do hope this doesn't continue for the rest of this series. I don't want Moffat's final series to come and go without it having given us some truly scary, truly exciting stories, with some truly intimidating monsters. I mean, Lord Sutcliffe is hardly going to go down in history as an all-time great Doctor Who villain, is he? Bottom line, as important as all the character stuff obviously is, this is still an adventure series. So let's have some adventure already. Don't get me wrong, the series as a whole should stay as simple as it can, not least because it's Moffat's last. He doesn't have the time left to do anything that complicated. But I personally enjoy having a bit more meat to the story, and I like it when Moffat adds a bit of complexity to what's going on, like in Series 8 and 9 with character drama. So I don't think it should stay quite this simple all series. I think that would make Moffat's final series feel undercooked compared to his previous ones, which would be a massive shame, considering how we started out with a massive, overarching, timey-wimey, multi-season story arc back in Series 5, and how we've got Mendasian Cybermen and the first ever televised multi-master story coming up later. If we're reaching back into the show's past to pluck out bits like that, then the story must surely demand a higher level of involvement than storybook simple. Maybe it's just me, but I don't see how you could do those things justice without delving into a bit more detail than that. Thankfully, I can be reassured by comments Moffat himself made in an interview prior to the airing of the pilot, in which he said the story complicates as it goes on. So hopefully, by the time we get to the two Masters, the original Cybermen, and the inevitable revelation of what's inside the Doctor's vault, and why he and Nardole need to be there all the time to protect it, and who or what they're protecting it from, if anything, the episodes will all have a bit more meat on their bones than the pilot, Smile and Thin Ice do. Having said all that, I mentioned earlier that Thin Ice seemed to wrap up the introduction arc, so it looks like starting with Knock Knock, I see what you did with the title there, we'll just be getting on with the adventures from here on out. The promo material has put this one across as being a proper scary one, which I think it'll only really be able to achieve by focusing on its plot more than how Bill feels about stuff. It'll also be interesting to see how our first new writer this year, Mike Bartlett, gets on with his first contribution to the show. I have to admit, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I'm really looking forward to this one. And ever since I heard its proper synopsis a couple weeks back, Oxygen has me pretty excited as well. But then it is Jamie Matheson. I do love me some Matheson, boy. My point is though, episodes 4 and 5 seem fit to turn this series round, back to a more balanced place that serves both objectives equally without leaning too far towards either one. All in all though, as slightly underwhelming as they've been in some areas, I have largely enjoyed the episodes so far, and though I'm not entirely committed to a firm opinion on Bill just yet, as I feel it's still too early to tell at this stage, I'm certainly optimistic about her, certainly more so than before. Same goes for Nardole too, bless him. And as for my theories on the Doctor's vault, well, I would have said that would be another video for another time, but it just emerged today with the latest issue of Doctor Who magazine, as I write this, The answer to that question will come in episode 6, Extremis. I was planning to do another talkathon video like this after that episode aired anyway, and keep covering the episodes in threes. So I'll just wait till then and talk about the actual answer. I hope you enjoyed listening to my thoughts. Be sure to share some of your own in the comments below, and thanks for watching. Until the next time, folks.